When my daughter told me I was embarrassing her in front of her coworkers at a restaurant, I smiled, excused myself to the restroom, and made 3 phone calls that changed everything. Within 72 hours, I had sold my house, quit my job, and moved 100 miles away to start a new life in Florida. She wanted independence from her embarrassing father. She got it permanently. What happened when she realized I was serious will leave you speechless. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what you would have done in my situation. I'm Clark Anderson, and for 30 years, I thought I knew what being a devoted father meant. I built Anderson Plumbing from a one-man operation in my garage into the largest residential plumbing company in northern New Jersey, with 18 employees and contracts worth over $2 million annually. Every decision I made, every sacrifice I endured, every 18-hour workday I pushed through was for one purpose: building a legacy for my daughter Sophia and ensuring she never experienced the financial struggles that defined my childhood. Sophia was everything to me, my greatest pride, the reason I turned down retirement offers and kept expanding the business year after year. I wanted her to inherit something substantial, something that would provide security for her children and grandchildren. For 30 years, I convinced myself that her increasing distance was natural independence, that her casual dismissal of my presence in her life was normal adult behavior, that her growing embarrassment at my blue-collar background was just temporary sophistication that would fade once she matured. I was deluding myself about everything. The wake-up call came on a Tuesday evening in October, during what I thought would be a pleasant dinner with my daughter. Sophia had been working as a marketing manager for a tech startup in Manhattan for 3 years, a job that paid well and surrounded her with college-educated professionals who spoke in acronyms and wore clothes that cost more than my work boots. She lived in a trendy apartment in Brooklyn that I helped fund, drove a leased BMW that I co-signed for, and had developed tastes for restaurants and experiences that required the kind of disposable income her salary couldn't quite support. Which is where I came in, the reliable financial safety net who transferred money whenever her lifestyle exceeded her earnings. I didn't mind supporting her while she established her career. That's what fathers do, right? We provide stability so our children can take risks and pursue their dreams without worrying about basic survival. But somewhere along the way, Sophia's appreciation for my support had transformed into something that looked uncomfortably like shame about its source. She'd invited me to dinner at Maria, an upscale Italian restaurant in Manhattan, where the pasta cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. It was supposed to be a celebration of her recent promotion to senior marketing manager, a milestone I was genuinely proud of and wanted to acknowledge properly. I wore my best suit, the navy one I'd bought for her college graduation, and arrived early to make sure we got a good table. Sophia appeared 20 minutes later, stylish and confident in the kind of effortlessly expensive outfit that announced success without seeming to try too hard. But her smile faltered when she saw me, a micro-expression of disappointment that she covered quickly, but not quickly enough. "Hi, Dad, you look nice." Nice. The way you'd describe a child's drawing that you felt obligated to praise. "You look beautiful, sweetheart. Congratulations on the promotion." We were seated at a table near the window, with views of Central Park and the kind of ambiance that justified the restaurant's reputation for being a place where important people conducted important business. I felt proud to be there with my successful daughter, celebrating her achievements in the kind of establishment that represented everything we'd worked toward. The conversation started pleasantly enough. Sophia told me about her new responsibilities, her expanded team, the projects she'd be overseeing. I shared updates about the business, some funny stories about difficult customers, my plans to bid on a large commercial contract that could be game-changing for the company. For the first hour, it felt like a normal father-daughter dinner, the kind of connection I'd been hoping we could maintain despite her increasingly busy schedule. But everything changed when Sophia's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression brightened in a way that made it clear this wasn't work-related. "Oh, perfect. Some of my co-workers are having drinks at a place nearby." Would it be okay if we stopped by after dinner? I'd love for you to meet them." I was touched by the invitation. Sophia rarely included me in her social life anymore, and the opportunity to meet the people she worked with felt like progress in rebuilding our relationship. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to meet your friends." We finished our meal and walked 3 blocks to a trendy wine bar that specialized in natural wines and small plates designed for sharing. The kind of place where the lighting was deliberately dim and the music was just loud enough to create an atmosphere of sophisticated intimacy. Sophia's co-workers were already there, clustered around a high table near the bar. 4 young professionals in their late 20s and early 30s, dressed in the casual but expensive style that announced their status without seeming to care about it. They greeted Sophia with the kind of enthusiastic warmth that suggested genuine friendship, and she introduced me with what seemed like pride. "Everyone, this is my dad." "Frank, Dad, this is Jessica, Marcus, David, and Amanda from work." I shook hands all around, noting their firm grips and direct eye contact, the social skills that come from college education and professional networking. They seemed genuinely pleased to meet me, asking polite questions about my business, and expressing appropriate interest in my answers. For the first few minutes, I felt like I belonged, like I was being accepted into Sophia's professional world as someone worth knowing. But as the conversation continued and the wine flowed more freely, I started to notice things that made me uncomfortable. The way Jessica asked about my little plumbing business, with just enough condescension to sting. How Marcus inquired about my retirement plans with the assumption that someone my age should be winding down rather than expanding. The subtle but unmistakable way they spoke to me like I was Sophia's elderly relative, who needed to be humored rather than her father, who deserved respect. I'd experienced this kind of class-conscious dismissal before, usually from customers who assumed that blue-collar workers were automatically less intelligent or sophisticated than people with office jobs. But I'd never experienced it in front of my daughter, and I'd never had to watch her reaction to seeing her father treated like a second-class citizen. What bothered me most was Sophia's response to her co-workers' subtle condescension. Instead of defending me or redirecting the conversation to more respectful territory, she seemed to be agreeing with their assessment of me as someone who didn't quite belong in their sophisticated circle. When David made a joke about honest work with your hands, Sophia laughed a little too loudly. When Amanda expressed surprise that I'd never been to Europe, Sophia quickly explained that I was very focused on the business, as if my lack of international travel was a character flaw rather than a result of prioritizing her education and future over my own experiences. The conversation that changed everything started when Marcus asked about my political opinions, clearly expecting me to hold views that would confirm their assumptions about working-class people. When I expressed moderate positions on several issues, positions that were thoughtful and well-informed, despite not aligning perfectly with their progressive orthodoxy, the dynamic at the table shifted noticeably. "That's interesting," Jessica said with the kind of smile that meant the opposite. "I wouldn't have expected those views from someone in your line of work." "What does my line of work have to do with my political opinions?" I asked, genuinely curious about the connection she was making. "Oh, nothing specific. It's just that people in traditional blue-collar industries tend to have more conventional perspectives on social issues." Conventional. Like traditional blue-collar workers were incapable of complex thinking or nuanced positions on important topics. "I think you might be making some assumptions about blue-collar workers that aren't necessarily accurate," I said calmly. "I've been running a business for 30 years, managing employees, dealing with customers from every background imaginable. That tends to give you a pretty broad perspective on people and issues." The silence that followed was awkward, filled with the recognition that I'd just politely called out their prejudice, and they didn't have a graceful way to respond. That's when Sophia made the comment that changed our relationship forever. "Dad, you're being a little intense. Maybe we should talk about something else." Intense. Because defending myself against class-based stereotyping was somehow inappropriate behavior that needed to be managed. I'm not being intense, Sophia. I'm having a conversation about politics, which is what they asked for. But you're making everyone uncomfortable. I looked around the table at her coworkers, who were indeed looking uncomfortable, but not because I'd been rude or aggressive. They were uncomfortable because they'd been caught making assumptions about me, and I'd responded with more intelligence and dignity than they'd expected from someone in my line of work. I'm making them uncomfortable by not conforming to their stereotypes about plumbers? Dad, please. You're embarrassing me. Embarrassing. In front of 4 people who had just spent 20 minutes subtly insulting my intelligence, my values, and my worth as a human being. My daughter was worried that I was embarrassing her by refusing to accept their condescension quietly. How exactly am I embarrassing you? You're being argumentative about politics when we're just trying to have a nice time. I'm being argumentative? Sophia, your friend Jessica just told me that people in my line of work aren't capable of sophisticated political thinking. Was I supposed to smile and agree with her? Sophia looked around the table at her co-workers who were watching this exchange with a fascinated horror of people witnessing a family drama they didn't want to be part of. Dad, you're misunderstanding what she meant. Am I? Then please explain what she actually meant when she said blue-collar workers have conventional perspectives on social issues. She wasn't insulting you, Dad. She was just making an observation about demographic trends, an observation that assumes I'm too stupid or close-minded to think for myself because I work with my hands instead of sitting in an office. The tension at the table was becoming unbearable, but I was past caring about maintaining polite fiction. For 30 years, I'd swallowed my pride and accepted dismissive treatment from people who thought my blue-collar background made me somehow less valuable than them. But I'd never had to do it while watching my own daughter agree with their assessment. Dad, you're being way too sensitive about this. Nobody was insulting you. Sophia, your friend called my political views conventional because of my job, then expressed surprise that I was capable of independent thinking. In what universe is that not insulting? She was just making conversation. You're turning this into something bigger than it needs to be. I'm turning this into something bigger? Sophia, these people have spent the entire evening talking down to me like I'm some kind of ignorant stereotype. And instead of standing up for your father, you're telling me I'm embarrassing you for refusing to play along. The other 4 people at the table were now openly staring, probably wondering how a pleasant after-dinner drink had turned into a family therapy session. But I was beyond worrying about their comfort or Sophia's reputation among her colleagues. Dad, please. Can we just drop this and enjoy the rest of the evening? Enjoy the rest of the evening? Sophia, your coworkers think your father is an ignorant plumber who doesn't belong in polite society, and you're agreeing with them. What exactly am I supposed to be enjoying? Nobody thinks that. You're being paranoid and embarrassing both of us. I'm being paranoid? Sophia, listen to yourself. You just told me I'm embarrassing you because I won't let your friends insult me to my face. Sophia looked around the table one more time, calculating the social cost of this conversation, weighing her relationship with her father against her standing with her professional peers. When she spoke again, her choice was clear. Dad, I think maybe you should go home. You're not in the right headspace for this kind of social situation. Not in the right headspace. Because a blue-collar worker who refused to accept condescension quietly was obviously having some kind of mental breakdown rather than simply standing up for himself. I looked at my daughter, this person I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who was now choosing her coworkers' comfort over her father's dignity. You're absolutely right, Sophia. I'm not in the right headspace to pretend that people insulting me is just friendly conversation. I stood up from the table, pulled out my wallet, and placed enough cash to cover everyone's drinks next to my unfinished wine. It was interesting meeting all of you. Sophia, thank you for the education about where I stand in your life. I walked out of that wine bar and into the October night, leaving behind not just an uncomfortable social situation, but any illusion I'd maintained about my relationship with my daughter. She was ashamed of me, embarrassed by my background, and willing to sacrifice my dignity to maintain her status among people who saw me as a stereotype rather than a person. I drove back to New Jersey in a state of crystalline clarity that I hadn't experienced in years. Every mile between Manhattan and my house in Hoboken gave me time to process what had just happened and what it meant for my future. Sophia wasn't going through a temporary phase of professional sophistication that would fade once she matured. She had fundamentally changed into someone who valued social status over family loyalty, someone who would rather see her father humiliated than risk her own reputation among people who didn't respect her enough to respect him. The man who had spent 30 years building a business to secure her future was now an embarrassment she had to manage rather than a father she wanted to defend. By the time I reached my driveway, I had made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 hours earlier. If Sophia was embarrassed by her blue-collar father, if my presence in her sophisticated life was such a burden, then perhaps it was time to remove that burden permanently. I walked into my house and went straight to my home office, where I kept the real estate listings I'd been collecting for the past year. Not because I was seriously considering moving, but because I'd been curious about property values in warmer climates, places where a man with my financial resources could live comfortably without the pressure of northeastern winters and social expectations. Florida had always appealed to me. No state income tax, year-round warmth, a slower pace of life, and most importantly, a place where nobody knew me as Sofia Castellanos' embarrassing blue-collar father. I could just be Frank, a retired businessman, enjoying his golden years without apologizing for his background or accepting condescension from people who thought their college degrees made them superior to someone who'd built something real with his hands. I opened my laptop and started making the phone calls that would change everything. The first call was to Jerry Matsumoto, a real estate agent I'd met at a plumbing convention 2 years earlier who'd moved to Naples, Florida, and started selling properties to retirees looking for sunshine and lower taxes. Jerry, it's Frank Castellano from New Jersey. We met at the Atlantic City Convention. Frank, good to hear from you. What's going on? I'm thinking about making a move to Florida. How quickly can you help me find something? How quickly do you want to move? This week. There was a pause while Jerry processed the urgency of my timeline. This week? Frank, are you okay? That's pretty fast for a major life change. I'm fine, Jerry. I'm just ready for a change of scenery. Something near the water, 3 bedrooms, move-in ready. Budget is flexible. I can show you some properties via video call tomorrow if you're serious about this timeline. I'm completely serious. Set it up. The second call was to Maria Santos, a business broker I'd worked with on several acquisitions over the years. Maria, I want to sell Anderson Plumbing. Complete sale, everything included. Frank, what's brought this on? Last time we talked, you were talking about expansion. Plans change. I want a quick sale to someone who'll take care of my employees. I'm not looking to maximize profit, just want a clean transaction. How quick are we talking? I want to be out of New Jersey by the end of the week. End of the week? Frank, that's not how business sales work. We need time for due diligence, financing arrangements, transition planning. Maria, I built this business from nothing over 30 years. I know exactly what it's worth, and I know who might want to buy it. Make some calls. Tell them I'm motivated to sell quickly, and I'm willing to be flexible on price for the right buyer. Frank, can I ask what's driving this urgency? This seems like an emotional decision rather than a strategic one. It's the most strategic decision I've made in years. I'm removing myself from a situation where I'm not wanted or respected. That's not emotional. That's practical. The third call was to my lawyer, Anthony Ricci, who'd handled my business affairs for 15 years. Anthony, I need you to draft a new will, immediately. Frank, it's almost midnight. Can this wait until morning? No, it can't wait. I want to change my primary beneficiary. Change it to whom? The American Heart Association and the Wounded Warrior Project. Equal split. What about Sophia? Sophia gets nothing. She's made it clear that she's embarrassed by her father and doesn't want me in her sophisticated life. So I'm removing myself from her life completely, including financially. Frank, this sounds like you're having a family dispute. Maybe you should sleep on this decision. Anthony, I've never been more clear about anything in my life. Draft the will. I'll sign it tomorrow. By 2 a.m., I had 3 video appointments scheduled with Jerry to look at Florida properties, 2 potential buyers lined up to tour my business, and a new will being prepared that would ensure Sophia never had to worry about being embarrassed by her blue-collar father's money. If she wanted independence from me, she was going to get complete independence, including financial independence. The next morning, I called Sophia from my office at the plumbing company. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carefully controlled in the way that meant she'd been thinking about our conversation all night. "Dad, I was going to call you later. I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about what you said last night. Dad, I'm sorry about how that went. I know my friends can be a little intense sometimes." No, Sophia, they weren't intense. They were condescending and prejudiced, and you were embarrassed that I didn't accept their treatment quietly. That's not... Okay, maybe they were a little out of line. But Dad, you have to understand that in my professional world, there are certain ways people interact, certain expectations about social behavior. I understand perfectly. In your professional world, blue-collar workers are expected to know their place and not challenge the assumptions that college-educated people make about them. That's not fair, Dad. What's not fair is spending 30 years building a business to provide for my daughter's future, only to discover that she's ashamed of where that money came from. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, probably trying to find a way to deny what we both knew was true. "I'm not ashamed of you, Dad." "Yes, you are. You're ashamed of my background, my education level, my political views, my social skills, everything that makes me who I am. And last night, you made it clear that having me in your sophisticated life is more burden than benefit." "Dad, that's not..." "I never said you were a burden. You said I was embarrassing you. You told me I wasn't in the right headspace for social situations with your coworkers. You chose their comfort over your father's dignity. What would you call that?" Another silence, longer this time. When Sophia spoke again, her voice was smaller, like she was beginning to understand that this conversation was different from our usual disagreements. "What do you want me to say, Dad?" "I don't want you to say anything. I'm calling to let you know that I'm solving the problem you identified last night." "What problem?" "The problem of having an embarrassing father who makes you uncomfortable in front of your professional colleagues." "Dad, I don't understand. I'm moving to Florida this week. You wanted independence from your embarrassing blue-collar father? You got it permanently." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When Sophia finally spoke, her voice was high with disbelief. "You're moving to Florida this week?" "I've already found a house. I'm selling the business. By Friday, I'll be a Florida resident, and you'll never have to worry about me embarrassing you again." "Dad, this is crazy. You can't just move to Florida because of one argument." "It wasn't one argument, Sophia. It was 30 years of gradually realizing that my daughter is ashamed of who I am and where I come from. Last night was just the final confirmation." "That's not true." "I'm not ashamed of you." "Then why did you tell me I was embarrassing you when I refused to let your friends treat me like a stereotype?" "Because you were being confrontational. You were making everyone uncomfortable." "I was standing up for myself, Sophia. Something I should have taught you to do for the people you love. But apparently, I failed in that lesson." I could hear her crying now. But whether it was from genuine remorse or just shock at the consequences of her behavior, I couldn't tell. "Dad, please don't do this. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out, Sophia. You've made your choice. You chose your professional reputation over your family loyalty. Now you get to live with that choice." "But Dad, what about the business? What about your house? What about me? What about you, Sophia? You're an adult with a successful career who finds her father embarrassing. You'll be fine without me." "I won't be fine. You're my father?" "No, Sophia. I'm your embarrassing blue-collar father who doesn't fit into your sophisticated world. But after Friday, I won't be your problem anymore." I hung up and immediately turned off my phone, knowing that Sophia would spend the next several hours calling back with increasingly desperate messages. But I'd made my decision, and unlike my daughter's opinions about me, it wasn't going to change based on social pressure or emotional manipulation. By Thursday evening, everything was arranged. Jerry had found me a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Naples with a pool and a view of the Gulf of Mexico. The price was reasonable, the location was perfect, and most importantly, it was 200 miles away from anyone who knew me as Sofia Castellano's embarrassing father. Maria had found a buyer for Castellano Plumbing, a larger company that wanted to expand into residential services and was willing to pay a fair price for my customer base and reputation. The sale would close the following week, and all 18 of my employees would be retained with improved benefits packages. My house in Hoboken had 3 serious offers after being listed for just 2 days. The real estate market was strong, and properties in my neighborhood were selling quickly to young professionals who wanted easy access to Manhattan. The same young professionals who probably shared Sofia's assumptions about blue-collar workers and their place in society. Anthony had prepared my new will, removing Sofia as my primary beneficiary and directing my estate to charities that helped people who actually needed assistance rather than supporting the lifestyle of someone who was embarrassed by its source. Friday morning, I loaded my pickup truck with everything I owned that mattered and started driving south on I-95. I'd shipped my furniture and personal belongings ahead of me, but I wanted to drive myself to Florida to have those 14 hours on the road to process what I was doing and why it was necessary. Somewhere around Richmond, Virginia, my phone rang. Sofia's number, probably calling from her office during a break between meetings with the sophisticated colleagues who thought her father wasn't worth treating with basic respect. I let it go to voicemail, along with the 17 other calls she'd made over the past 3 days. I wasn't ready to talk to her yet, and I might never be ready. At this point, any conversation we had would just be her trying to convince me to come back and resume accepting the treatment I'd finally decided I didn't deserve. I reached Naples just as the sun was setting over the Gulf of Mexico, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that I'd never seen from my house in New Jersey. The air was warm and humid, filled with the scent of salt water and tropical plants, a completely different world from the industrial landscape I had left behind. My new house was everything Jerry had promised, a comfortable ranch-style home with a screened porch overlooking a canal that led to the bay. It was quiet and peaceful, surrounded by other retirees who'd made similar decisions to start over in a place where nobody knew their history or had preconceived notions about their worth. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching boats cruise slowly down the canal, and checked my voicemail for the first time in 3 days. 23 messages, all from Sofia, progressing from anger to confusion to desperation as she realized I was serious about this life change. "Dad, this is crazy. You can't just move to Florida because of one fight." "Dad, I talked to Maria Santos. She said you really sold the business? This has to be some kind of joke. Dad, please call me back. We need to talk about this rationally." "Dad, I drove by the house and there's a sold sign in the yard." "What the hell is happening?" "Dad, I know you're angry, but this is insane. Moving to Florida isn't going to solve anything. Dad, please. I'm sorry about what I said. I didn't mean that you were embarrassing. I don't know. I was stressed about work and I took it out on you." "Dad, it's been 3 days and nobody knows where you are. Are you okay? Are you safe? Please just call me back and let me know you're alive." "Dad, I realize I made a mistake. I shouldn't have said those things to you, and I shouldn't have let my friends treat you that way. But running away to Florida isn't going to fix our relationship. Dad, I love you. I know I don't say it enough, and I know I haven't been the daughter you deserve, but I love you, and I need you in my life. Please come home." "Dad, I finally understand what you meant about choosing my colleagues over my family. You're right. I did choose their opinion over your dignity, and I'm ashamed of myself for that. But please don't let my mistake destroy our relationship." The messages were increasingly emotional, increasingly desperate, as Sofia realized that her embarrassing father wasn't coming back to resume his previous role as her financial safety net and emotional punching bag. But what struck me most was how long it had taken her to acknowledge that she'd done anything wrong. 23 messages of anger, confusion, and bargaining before she finally reached the stage of accepting responsibility for her behavior. The next morning, I called her back. She answered before the first ring finished. "Dad." "Oh my God, thank God you're okay. Where are you?" "I'm in Naples, Florida, sitting on my porch, watching the sunrise over the Gulf of Mexico." "Your porch?" "Dad, what do you mean your porch?" "I mean I bought a house here, Sophia. This is where I live now." "You actually bought a house? In Florida?" "I told you I was moving to Florida. You apparently didn't believe me. But Dad, this is insane. You can't just leave New Jersey because of one argument." "It wasn't one argument, Sophia. It was the final argument. The moment when you made it crystal clear that having me in your life was more embarrassment than benefit." "That's not—" "Dad, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I've been thinking about it all week, and I realize I handled that situation terribly. You handled it exactly the way you wanted to handle it. You chose your professional reputation over your father's dignity, and now you get to live with that choice. But I don't want to live with that choice. I want to fix this." "Sophia, there's nothing to fix. This is what you wanted. You wanted independence from your embarrassing father, and now you have it. Permanently?" I could hear her crying, but I felt surprisingly little sympathy. For 30 years I'd prioritized her happiness over my own self-respect, and this was where it had led us. "Dad, please. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll apologize to you in front of my co-workers. I'll tell them they were wrong to treat you that way. I'll make it clear that I'm proud of you and what you've accomplished." "Sophia, I don't want apologies or grand gestures. I want a daughter who respects her father enough to defend him when people insult him to his face. Since I apparently don't have that, I've decided to build a life where I don't need it. But you do have that. I do respect you." "No, you don't. You respect my bank account and my willingness to fund your lifestyle. But you don't respect me as a person. And you proved that when you told me I was embarrassing you for refusing to accept condescension quietly." "Dad, that's not fair. You know I love you. I know you love what I provide for you. I'm not sure you love who I actually am." The conversation continued for another hour, with Sophia cycling through every argument and emotional appeal she could think of. But I'd made my decision, and unlike her respect for me, it wasn't subject to revision based on changing circumstances. When I finally hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time in decades, I was living somewhere that I'd chosen for myself, not because it was convenient for Sophia's education or career or social life. I was Frank Castellano, successful retiree, not Sophia's embarrassing father who had to be managed and hidden from polite society. Over the next few months, I settled into my new life in Florida with an ease that surprised me. I joined a fishing club, started volunteering at a local veterans organization, and made friends with other retirees who judged people by their character rather than their educational background or professional status. Nobody in Naples knew or cared that I'd been a plumber in New Jersey. I was just Frank, a guy who'd worked hard, saved his money, and earned the right to enjoy his retirement in peace. Sophia called regularly, each conversation following the same pattern. She'd apologize for her behavior, express regret about our argument, and ask when I was coming home. But she never seemed to understand that I wasn't coming home, because home wasn't a place I'd been driven away from by shame and disappointment. Home was where I was respected and valued, and that was now Naples, Florida. 6 months after moving, I received a letter from Sophia. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter on her personal stationery. 3 pages of careful penmanship that looked like it had taken her hours to compose. "Dear Dad," it began, "I've been thinking about our conversation every day for 6 months, and I need to tell you something I should have said the night this all started. I was wrong. Not just about how I handled that situation with my coworkers, but about how I've been treating you for years. You were right when you said I was ashamed of you. I was ashamed, not because of who you are, but because I'd become the kind of person who cared more about what strangers thought than about defending the people I love. I let my professional insecurities turn me into someone who would embarrass her own father to fit in with people who didn't even respect me enough to respect him. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why you don't want me in your life anymore. But I need you to know that I've learned something important from losing you. I've learned that the respect of people who think they're better than your family isn't worth having. I've learned that professional success doesn't mean anything if it comes at the cost of losing the people who actually love you. And I've learned that having a father who worked with his hands to build something real is worth more than having the approval of people who've never built anything except their own egos. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for what I said and how I treated you. But if you're willing to give me another chance, I promise I'll be the daughter who defends you instead of the daughter who manages you. I love you, Dad, not because of what you can do for me, but because of who you are. And I'm proud to be Frank Castellano's daughter, even if I forgot that for a while. Love, Sophia. I read the letter 3 times, looking for the manipulation or hidden agenda I'd learned to expect. But it wasn't there. For the first time in our relationship, Sophia had written to me without wanting anything except the possibility of rebuilding what her behavior had destroyed. 2 weeks later, Sophia called to ask if she could visit me in Florida. Not to convince me to move back to New Jersey, but to see my new life and meet the people who'd become important to me. I want to understand what you've built here, Dad, and I want you to know that wherever you choose to live, I want to be part of your life. She flew down for a long weekend in March, and I watched her interact with my new friends with genuine interest and respect. She asked thoughtful questions about their backgrounds, their careers, their families. She listened when they told stories, laughed at their jokes, and treated them like people worth knowing rather than stereotypes to be managed. When I introduced her to Tony Ricci, a retired electrician who'd become one of my closest friends, she didn't make assumptions about his education or sophistication. She just talked to him like a person, the same way I'd hoped she would talk to me in front of her coworkers. "Your dad's told us a lot about you," Tony said. "He's really proud of your success in New York." "I'm proud of his success, too," Sophia replied. It took me too long to realize that building something from nothing is a lot more impressive than managing someone else's marketing budget. That evening, we sat on my porch watching the sunset over the Gulf, and Sophia apologized again for the way she'd treated me. But this time her apology was different. It wasn't about convincing me to change my behavior or restore her financial benefits. It was about acknowledging the person she'd become and her commitment to becoming someone better. "Dad, I know you're happy here, and I don't want to ask you to give up this life you've built, but I hope you'll let me visit regularly, and I hope you'll consider me part of your Florida family now. You'll always be my daughter, Sophia, but you're right that this is my home now. I'm not coming back to New Jersey to resume being the embarrassing father you have to manage around your sophisticated friends. I don't have those friends anymore, Dad." "What do you mean?" I realize that people who would treat my father with disrespect aren't the kind of people I want in my life. I've found a new job with a company that values character over credentials, and I've made new friends who judge people by who they are rather than what they do for a living. I looked at this young woman who had once called me embarrassing, who had learned through loss and reflection what family loyalty actually meant, and I realized that moving to Florida had been the best thing I'd ever done for both of us. Not because running away solved our problems, but because it forced Sophia to confront the consequences of taking her father for granted. "I'm proud of you for making those changes," I said. "It takes courage to admit you were wrong, and even more courage to change the people in your life based on your values." "I learned from the best," she replied. "My father taught me that self-respect isn't negotiable, even when standing up for yourself costs you everything." We spent the rest of her visit fishing, exploring Naples, and talking about everything we'd both learned from our time apart. When she left, it was with genuine sadness rather than relief, and with concrete plans to return in 2 months. Today, Sophia visits me in Florida 4 times a year, and I fly to New York twice a year to see her. But I never go to her work events, and she never asks me to. She's learned to keep her professional and personal lives separate, and I've learned that I don't need her co-workers' approval to feel valued by my daughter. The house in Naples has become our family headquarters, the place where we rebuild our relationship on terms that respect both of us. Sophia brings her friends when they visit, but now they're the kind of friends who appreciate a good fish story. And don't make assumptions about people based on their education or occupation. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't moved to Florida, if I'd just swallowed my pride and accepted Sophia's treatment as the price of maintaining our relationship. I'd probably still be in New Jersey, still funding her lifestyle, still accepting condescension from her friends, still being the embarrassing father she had to manage rather than the father she chose to love. Instead, I'm sitting on my porch in paradise, watching the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico, secure in the knowledge that my daughter respects me enough to defend me and loves me enough to visit regularly. If you've enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments about family respect, boundaries, and the courage it takes to choose yourself when the people you love take you for granted. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from situations where you're not valued, even when that means leaving everything familiar behind. The greatest gift I ever gave my daughter wasn't my business or my financial support. It was showing her what self-respect looks like and what happens when you take the people who love you for granted. Because real love isn't about accepting disrespect to maintain relationships. It's about demanding the respect you deserve and being willing to walk away if you don't get it. Sophia learned that fathers aren't just ATMs who fund your lifestyle. They're people who deserve the same courtesy you'd show a stranger. And I learned that home isn't where you're from. Home is where you're respected, valued, and free to be yourself without apology. Sometimes that means moving quest 200 miles away to find it.